The African sun, a relentless eye in the vast, pale sky, had been tracking young Keon for 3 days. 3 days of a slow, agonizing descent into solitude. The heat shimmered off the cracked earth of the savannah, turning the horizon into a confusing, distorted watercolor painting. For a lion cub, barely 3 months old, this was not the world of thrilling hunts and playful wrestling. This was an endless, arid prison. Keon wasn't a large cub. Even by the standards of his young age, he was lean, his frame already echoing the scarcity of the last few days. His coat, a beautiful tawny gold dotted with the faint spots of infancy, was now dull and plastered with dust, a camouflage that offered no comfort against the burning elements. He had lost his mother, his pride, and his way in a single terrifying moment, a sudden, chaotic stampede of wildebeest that had scattered his family unit like fallen leaves in a hurricane. The scent trails, once a clear map back to his mother's comforting presence, had long faded, replaced only by the acrid smell of dry grass and the metallic tang of fear. Each desperate, stumbling step had carried him further from safety and closer to the edges of the wild, towards the boundary where the raw, untamed land met the paved artery of human civilization, the main reserve road. He remembered the last time he had tasted milk, a warm, rich memory that now felt like a dream. His stomach was a hollow, tight drum. The hunger was a constant, low-grade ache that had intensified into a sharp, debilitating pain, sapping the remaining strength from his slender legs. He'd tried to stalk a small gecko yesterday, but his paws, usually swift and sure, had betrayed him, dragging weakly in the dust. The gecko had zipped away, leaving Keon panting, the failure a heavy, final weight in his spirit. Predators, even young ones, are driven by instinct. But instinct needs fuel, and Keon's tank was empty. He'd learned quickly that the world was unforgiving. Jackals snapped at his heels from a distance, assessing his weakness. Vultures circled high above, dark, patient witnesses to his decline. Every shadow seemed to harbor a danger, every rustle of dry bush a potential end. He had pushed on, purely on the desperate, ingrained hope of survival, fueled by the memory of his mother's deep, rumbling purr. But the sun had won. It beat down on his back with the weight of a stone. His mouth was dry, his tongue thick and useless. He'd been trying to cross a wide patch of gravel near the roadside, seeking the slight shade offered by a distant acacia, but his legs finally buckled beneath him. Not dramatically, but with a slow, grinding inevitability. He collapsed, his cheek resting against the hot, coarse stones of the road shoulder. He closed his eyes, a tiny, fading spark of life in a world too big and too harsh for him. The sounds of the savannah, the buzz of insects, the distant cry of a bird seemed to recede, muffled by the fog of exhaustion. He was invisible, insignificant, and slowly succumbing to the deep sleep of the truly spent. The cruel asphalt, the road that promised movement and life, had become the place of his end. Unbeknownst to Keon, this very road, this strip of pavement, was about to bring him the only hope he had left. It was a bridge, not a barrier, and on the other side of the bridge were 2 humans. Deep within a dusty, well-worn 4-wheel-drive vehicle, the atmosphere was one of quiet, contented travel. David and his daughter Lily were on the tail end of a much-anticipated safari trip. David, 52, was a man of quiet observation, deeply appreciative of the wild. Lily, 10 years old, was the embodiment of boundless curiosity, her eyes glued to the landscape, seeking wonders in every movement. They had been driving slowly, enjoying the low afternoon light that softened the edges of the landscape. David was focused on the road, while Lily was happily recounting the habits of the giraffes they had seen that morning. "And Dad, remember how the baby giraffe looked like it was wearing stilts? It was so clumsy, but Mom said that's how they learn to run really fast." Lily chirped, resting her chin on the windowsill. David chuckled, a warm, reassuring sound. That's right, sweetie. Every animal has a tricky start. It's a tough world out there. It was precisely in that moment, in the middle of that ordinary, gentle conversation, that the extraordinary occurred. David was scanning the roadside, a habit born of years of defensive driving in the wild, looking for sudden dashes of warthogs or impala. His eye caught a small, tawny lump, far smaller than a boulder, lying right where the dirt met the asphalt. He slowed the vehicle, his foot easing off the accelerator. "Hold on, Lily, what is that?" Lily, with her acute child's vision, focused instantly. The playful lightness vanished from her face. "Dad, it's an animal. It's lying down." As they crept closer, the identity of the lump became terrifyingly clear. It wasn't a deer or a common antelope. It was a cat, a big cat, but impossibly small too. David stopped the car, the engine idling, the air suddenly thick with silence and tension. He looked at his daughter, then back at the roadside. Lying sprawled and utterly motionless on the sun-baked gravel was a tiny lion cub. The cub, Keon, was barely visible. He looked less like a king of the jungle and more like a discarded, ragged toy. His chest was barely moving. "Oh, David, look at him," Lily whispered, her voice cracking with instant, heartbreaking pity. He's broken." David's mind raced. In the wild, you do not interfere. The rules are absolute. Respect the distance, respect the cycle of life and death, and above all, respect the danger. A collapsed cub, even a tiny one, meant the mother was likely nearby, hidden or circling back. A lioness defending her young is the most formidable force on the savannah, but Keon looked utterly alone. No track of adult paws nearby, no distant roar, just the suffocating quiet. The conflict was immediate, brutal, and internal. His training and intellect screamed, "Drive away, it's a natural event, it's dangerous." But his heart, fueled by his daughter's tearful face and the sight of the starving, abandoned creature, whispered a different, more powerful command. "Help him. He's dying." Lily, meanwhile, didn't wait for an answer. She reached for the door handle. "We have to give him water, Dad. He's thirsty. He's so thirsty." David slammed his hand on the central locking button, a quick, sharp action. "Lily, no, absolutely not. We don't know where the mother is. A lioness can be on us in seconds. It's too dangerous. We can call the ranger station from here." He pulled his satellite phone, his hands shaking slightly, adrenaline already beginning to flood his system. But his eyes kept going back to Keon. The cub hadn't moved a millimeter. He wasn't twitching, wasn't growling, wasn't breathing heavily. He was simply existing, on the very edge of ceasing to exist. Calling the Rangers meant a wait of at least 45 minutes, likely an hour. Keon looked like he had 45 seconds. Lily stared at her father, her 10-year-old wisdom overriding her fear. "Dad, look at him. He is dead already if we wait. Please, just 1 minute. If you open the door, I promise I won't go near. I'll just watch." She was pleading, the purity of her compassion a heavy weight on David's conscience. He looked at the dusty phone, then at the dying cub, then at his daughter. He was faced with an impossible choice: uphold the rules and watch an innocent life fade, or break every single rule of the savannah and risk everything. The cub's helplessness, its tiny frame, and its visible pain tipped the scales. He couldn't reconcile the image of the collapsing, starving animal with the luxury of their air-conditioned vehicle. Taking a deep, shaky breath, David made the decision that would change Keon's life and his family's forever. It was a foolish, reckless, and undeniably human choice. "Okay, Lily, 1 minute. I am going out. You stay locked in this car. If I tell you to drive, you hit the horn and hold it. Do you understand? And if you see any large cat, even a glimpse, you honk and drive straight over it if you have to, but you don't stop." His voice was low, firm, and layered with the kind of fear he rarely showed. He gathered a lightweight blanket from the back seat, a thick pair of gloves, and the largest bottle of water they had. The moment he cracked the door open, the coolness of the air-conditioned cabin rushed out, replaced by a sudden, intense blast of dry heat. The dust particles suspended in the still air seemed to swirl around him as he stepped onto the asphalt. David moved slowly, deliberately, his every sense heightened, expecting the sudden rush of a charging lioness from the bushes. He scanned the tree line, the tall grass, the small rocky outcrop 50 yards away. Nothing. Silence. Only the buzz of the flies already investigating the poor cub. He took 10 slow steps toward Keon, 10 steps that felt like a mile. Keon, roused slightly by the vibration of the footsteps, lifted his head just an inch. His eyes, the color of weak amber, flickered open, but they held no recognition, no fight, and certainly no fear. He was too far gone for primal terror. He simply registered the large, looming shadow that blocked the merciless sun. As David approached the tiny creature, the true scale of the tragedy became apparent. Keon was skeletal. His ribs were etched clearly beneath his thin skin. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. This wasn't just a hungry cub. This was a cub that was actively dying of starvation and dehydration. This cub had been alone for too long. David knelt about 5 feet away, placing the water bottle down slowly. He spoke, his voice low and soothing, though he knew Keon couldn't understand the words. "It's all right, little one. It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." Keon watched him, his head dropping back onto the stones. He couldn't even summon a weak growl. He was completely defeated. Now pause and think about the emotions you're feeling right now. The tension, the fear for the cub, the hope for the rescue. These are the powerful feelings that connect us to the wild world. If you love stories like this, where bravery meets deep compassion, make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming rescue stories. Take a moment right now to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications and give this video a like. Your support helps us tell more of these vital, life-saving stories. Thank you. David gently uncorked the water bottle, poured a small amount onto the dusty ground near Keon's snout, and waited. The cub didn't stir. He tried again, wetting the gravel closer to the cub's nose. Keon's nostrils barely flared. This wasn't working. David knew he had to cross the final boundary. He had to touch the wild. He slipped on the thick leather gloves, a futile gesture against the claws of a full-grown lioness, but a small comfort against the teeth of a desperate cub. He moved his hand, slow as the setting sun, towards Keon's flank. The touch was feather-light, a momentary brushing of the thick glove against the bony hip. Keon didn't react, confirming David's deepest fear. The cub was completely non-responsive, in shock. He was beyond simple thirst. He needed immediate, desperate intervention. David carefully scooped the blanket beneath the cub, gathering the tiny, limp body into his arms. Keon weighed almost nothing, a shocking fact for an animal that should be robust and full of youthful energy. He felt the rapid, weak fluttering of the cub's heart against his protected wrist. Keon's head lolled back, his eyes half closed. He had the cub. Now, the impossible part, getting him to safety without being attacked by the mother. In the car, Lily watched, her breath held tight in her chest. She saw her father scoop up the cub, and her eyes widened in relief and terror. Relief that the cub was moving, terror that the mother was about to appear. David moved back to the car quickly, but with the measured steps of a man carrying something immensely fragile and valuable. He didn't run, knowing panic could draw attention. When he reached the vehicle, he yanked the door open and placed the blanket-wrapped Keon gently on the floor of the passenger seat, away from Lily, who was still safely locked in the back. "He's in, Lily. He's safe. I need to drive. I need to get him to the center right now." David was breathing hard, the adrenaline spike finally hitting him. Lily nodded, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes shining with fierce purpose. "Go, Dad, go!" David got back behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes alternating between the road ahead and the small, still bundle lying on the floor. Keon hadn't made a single noise. He was silent, frail, and critically close to death. The realization hit David. They hadn't just rescued a hungry cub, they had kidnapped a ghost from the very gates of death, and the hard work of saving his life had only just begun. The sun was dipping lower, and the race against time had officially started. He pressed the accelerator, turning the vehicle away from the park, toward the nearest ranger station and veterinary center, praying the cub would survive the journey. The incredible had happened. A child's compassion had forced a man to defy the laws of nature, but the ultimate outcome remained agonizingly uncertain. The journey to the nearest veterinary center, a facility primarily established for monitoring and treating high-value wildlife, was a blur of dust and anxiety. David drove faster than he should have, the constant fear of Keon's stillness weighing heavily on him. Lily, silent now, sat in the back, her small hand resting near the cub's motionless form, a silent vigil. The facility was run by Dr. Eleanor Vance, a veteran wildlife veterinarian whose hands had touched and healed nearly every creature the savannah had to offer. David burst through the clinic doors, holding the frail bundle, his urgency overriding all formalities. "Dr. Vance, we found him on the roadside, lion cub, maybe 3 months, starving, dehydrated, non-responsive. We need immediate help," David announced, his voice tight with controlled panic. Eleanor, a woman in her late 50s, with eyes that held a quiet understanding of life and death in the wild, took one look at the blanket-wrapped shape and knew the severity of the situation. Her calm, professional demeanor was a welcome anchor in David's chaos. "Get him onto the examination table, David, quickly. Lily, thank you for being brave. I need you to stay with the receptionist for a few minutes, okay? We have to work fast." Eleanor and her assistant Mark moved with practiced efficiency. They gently unwrapped Keon. His tiny body was a heartbreaking sight. His gums were pale, his skin lacked elasticity, and his breathing was barely a flutter. He was in deep metabolic shock. Vitals are almost non-existent. Hypoglycemia is severe. Mark, warm intravenous fluids, very slow drip. Just enough to stabilize him. We can't shock his system, and we need to get his temperature up, Eleanor commanded, her voice steady. They worked relentlessly against the ticking clock. A heated blanket was placed beneath Keon. A tiny catheter, a mere thread, was carefully inserted into a vein in his leg, delivering the life-sustaining fluids drop by slow drop. His blood sugar levels were dangerously low. The first hour was a standoff with death. Keon showed no signs of awareness, remaining deeply comatose. David and Lily waited outside the treatment room, the silence of the waiting area amplifying the tension. Lily, sitting rigidly, finally spoke, her voice small. "Dad, will he die?" David placed his hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. "I don't know, honey, but he's with the best doctor now. We did the right thing, Lily. We gave him a chance. That's all we could do." It was during the second hour that the first flicker of hope appeared. Eleanor called them into the room, her face still serious, but her eyes holding a faint light. "He's stabilized, barely. We managed to bring his blood sugar up slightly and his core temperature is rising. But the critical issue is his gastrointestinal system. He hasn't eaten in days, possibly a week. We can't just feed him a large amount. It would kill him. We have to introduce nutrients, but at a microscopic level," Eleanor demonstrated, showing them a syringe filled with a thin, specially formulated electrolyte solution. "We'll give him this every 15 minutes, slowly. We need a feeding schedule that lasts all night. We need continuous monitoring." David didn't hesitate. "I'll do it. I'm staying. Lily and I will stay. We can take shifts." Eleanor nodded, a hint of admiration in her expression. "David, this is a massive commitment. If he survives the night, he'll need months of rehabilitation. But thank you. Your daughter's instinct saved him." The night began. It was a strange, intimate vigil. David and Eleanor took turns, meticulously administering the life-saving fluid. Keon, still unresponsive, lay between them, a tiny monument to resilience. Lily eventually curled up on a small cot, exhausted but still protective, watching the cub's frail, sleeping form. As the pre-dawn hour approached, the darkest point of the night, something changed. As David prepared the next syringe, Keon, with a sudden jerky movement, shifted his head. His ear twitched. Then he let out a sound. It wasn't a roar or a growl, it was a tiny rasping squeak, a sound so weak it was almost heartbreaking. It was the sound of a voice returning. David froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Eleanor rushed over. Keon opened his eyes fully for the first time since the rescue. His amber gaze was no longer vacant. It was confused, wary, but alive. He looked around the room, registering the strange smells, the warmth, and the large, benign human faces hovering above him. He tried to lift his head, but failed. Instead, his tiny pink tongue flicked out and licked the electrolyte solution David had placed near his mouth. The reaction was primal, immediate. He tasted the sustenance, and the survival instinct, which had been dormant, roared back to life. This is the moment everything changed, the moment the wild heart decided to fight. It's a testament to the fact that even the smallest life, on the edge of the deepest darkness, deserves a helping hand. If Keon's fight has touched your heart, and you want to follow every moment of his incredible journey to recovery and eventual return to the wild, please make sure to hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement powers our mission to share these beautiful, hopeful stories with the world. Over the next few hours, the squeaks turned into soft, low whines, cries of hunger, confusion, and fear. By sunrise, Keon was awake, though still weak. He was responding, though with suspicion. His eyes followed Eleanor and David as they moved around the room. The next major challenge was feeding. Eleanor prepared a very diluted mixture of milk substitute, high in protein and electrolytes. David, using a dropper, attempted the first true feeding. Keon, weak as he was, instinctively resisted the dropper, batting at it with a clumsy, feeble paw. Lily, awakened by the noises, approached the table slowly, careful not to startle him. She spoke to him in a soft, low murmur. "It's okay, Keon. It's food. You need to be strong, little king." Eleanor watched Lily's interaction carefully. She noticed that Keon's body relaxed slightly at the child's voice. "Lily, try holding the dropper. Just hold it near his nose. Don't force it." Lily took the dropper, her hands steady. She held it close to Keon, letting a single drop fall onto his nose. The scent of the milk was irresistible. Keon paused, sniffed, and then, with a burst of instinctual energy, latched onto the dropper, sucking weakly. He drank only a few milliliters, but it was a colossal victory. It was the first true meal he had taken in nearly a week. That morning, Eleanor confirmed the diagnosis: severe starvation and dehydration, but remarkably, no major underlying infections or injuries. A miraculous outcome for a cub that had faced the harsh environment alone. The next few days established a routine of care that was both exhausting and rewarding. David and Lily became Keon's temporary primary caregivers. David, the logistics man, organized the supplies and feeding schedule. Lily, the heart, provided the gentle, consistent presence that helped soothe the frightened cub. Keon was still fragile, but he was no longer silent. His hunger grew. The weak whines turned into demanding squeals when the food was late. His movement, initially non-existent, progressed to unsteady wobbles. He learned to associate David and Lily with safety and sustenance. There was a moment on the third day when Keon, having finished his meal, looked up at David, not with fear, but with a momentary look of trust. He licked David's gloved hand and then, to everyone's astonishment, he attempted a small, wobbly purr, a sound like a rusty engine starting up, a promise of the powerful cat he was meant to become. David felt a wave of profound emotion wash over him, a feeling far deeper than simple relief. This tiny creature had entered their lives and had already stolen their hearts. The life they saved was now intertwining with their own. Keon was fighting, and they were fighting with him. The days melted into weeks and weeks into months. Keon's recovery was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the sheer will of the wild creature and the tireless dedication of David, Lily, and Dr. Vance. The skeletal cub found near the road transformed into a vibrant, muscular young lion. At 6 months old, Keon was now a magnificent animal, full of boisterous, demanding energy. His tawny coat was sleek and shone with health, his paws were massive, and his roar, which started as a pathetic squeak, was now a deep, throaty rumble that shook the clinic walls. The initial fear had long since been replaced by a deep, almost familial bond. The small quarantine room at the center became a nursery and a training ground. Lily was Keon's favorite human. She spent hours reading to him, talking softly and engaging in rough and tumble play, a privilege allowed only with Eleanor's close supervision and thick gloves. Keon treated Lily not as a predator, but as a playful littermate. He would rub his huge head against her leg, purr like a jackhammer when she scratched behind his ears, and follow her every move with those bright amber eyes. David, meanwhile, handled the demanding logistics of feeding Keon, which now involved substantial amounts of raw meat. He also managed the cub's socialization with other orphaned young lions at the facility, a crucial step for Keon to relearn the language of his own species. Keon was a quick study, establishing his place in the hierarchy with a mix of playful aggression and inherent dominance. He was, after all, a lion. But as Keon grew in size and strength, the shadow of the inevitable began to lengthen. David and Lily had been warned from the start. The goal was always rehabilitation and release, not domestication. Keon was not a pet. He was a future king of the savannah, and keeping him in human care for too long would compromise his ability to survive. One afternoon, Dr. Vance called David and Lily into her office. Keon, now nearly 8 months old, was waiting for his final release assessment. "Keon is ready, David," Eleanor said gently, her voice firm despite the underlying emotion. "Physically, he is stronger than any orphaned cub we've handled. He hunts well, he interacts appropriately with the other young lions, and his fear response to unfamiliar people is developing, which is vital." Lily's face, which had been bright with pride, suddenly clouded over. "But Dr. Vance, he still loves us. He still purrs when I come near him." "That is the hardest part, Lily," Eleanor replied, her gaze softening. "He loves you because you saved him and you raised him. But that love is a danger to him now. If he approaches a tourist vehicle or a farmer's homestead looking for a scratch, he will be destroyed. Our success isn't measured by how much he loves us, but by how well he can forget us and survive on his own terms." David understood the cold, logical necessity of her words, but the emotional pain was sharp. He had come to see Keon as a part of his life, a reminder of the raw, powerful beauty of the wild, and the moment he nearly lost him. "What is the plan, Eleanor?" David asked, his voice rough. "We have identified a protected conservancy, far from any human settlements, with a small, established pride that we are monitoring. He has the size and the social skills to integrate, but we need to break the final bond with you both. It's painful, but necessary. For the next 3 weeks, you and Lily must distance yourselves. Mark will take over all feedings, wearing protective, scent-blocking gear. Lily, you can visit him, but you cannot touch him or speak to him. You have to be a stranger." The next 3 weeks were agonizing. Lily, who had poured her entire heart into Keon's recovery, found the separation unbearable. She would sit quietly outside his enclosure, watching him play, but when she tried to call his name, David would gently pull her back. Keon, confused and frustrated by the sudden withdrawal, would pace and whine, his beautiful eyes searching for the familiar faces and the loving touch that no longer came. He began to associate David and Lily not with comfort, but with absence. It was a calculated cruelty designed to save his life. The day of the release arrived with a cold, clear dawn. A team of rangers, along with David, Lily, and Eleanor, prepared Keon for the final journey. They had to sedate him slightly for the transport, a gentle, temporary sleep to minimize the stress of the journey. Lily clung to Keon's massive neck one last time, tears streaming silently down her face, soaking into his thick mane. David watched, his own throat tight. He knelt beside his daughter, his hand resting on the warm, powerful flank of the young lion. "Be brave, my little king," Lily whispered into Keon's ear, a final, secret message between two souls connected by fate. "Go home." The transport vehicle drove Keon deep into the massive, protected conservancy, a land of rolling hills, thick brush, and abundant prey. It was miles from the place where he had collapsed near the road, a place now cleansed of his suffering. The moment of the release was tense and beautiful. As the door of the transport crate was lifted, Keon hesitated for a fraction of a second. He was awake now, his senses sharp, recognizing the smells of true freedom, the rich scent of buffalo grass, the sharp, clean air, the distant, unmistakable scent of other lions. He looked back at the retreating vehicle, registering the shapes of the humans one last time. He saw David and Lily standing at a safe distance, watching. There was no hesitation in his eyes this time, only a powerful, forward-looking intent. The memory of the road, the hunger, and the fear had been superseded by the instinct for the hunt, the call of the wild. With a fluid, powerful leap, Keon cleared the tailgate. He paused, his body low to the ground, taking in the full measure of his kingdom. He was magnificent, a perfect specimen of his species, every muscle coiled with potential energy. He didn't run towards the tall grass. He walked with a measured, deliberate pace, a conqueror reclaiming his throne. He turned his head once more, not looking at David or Lily, but scanning the horizon, assessing the possibilities. Then, with a flick of his tail, he disappeared into the dense undergrowth, vanishing back into the endless tapestry of the savannah. He was gone. David put his arm around Lily, who was quietly sobbing into his jacket. "He's free, honey. Look at him go. That's where he belongs." They stayed there for a long time, watching the spot where Keon had vanished. They didn't need to see him. They could feel his presence, a triumphant energy radiating from the brush. The story of Keon is not just a story of a rescue. It is a profound lesson in the true meaning of connection and sacrifice. David and Lily had stepped outside the bounds of what was safe, what was sensible, driven purely by the compassion for a dying cub. They risked danger. They spent months of their lives in tireless service, and finally, they faced the deepest emotional hurdle, letting go of something they loved for the sake of its true destiny. They left the conservancy that day, not with the lion they had saved, but with the knowledge that they had restored a piece of the wild, that they had given a life back to the savannah. David, the cautious man who once feared breaking the rules, had learned the greatest lesson from his daughter. Sometimes the unbelievable happens not because of what you know, but because of what your heart tells you to do. And somewhere, deep in the golden grass of the African plains, a young lion named Keon was running free, the roar of his pride awaiting him, his story a permanent part of the human heart that refused to drive by.